Okay. Um, so before you like just get some groundwork done, before you like took the height foundations quiz, what do you think your like biggest foundation, like moral foundations that really guided your like choices were like before you knew like the names and like exactly what they were?
I think it was probably in my mind, I thought it would be like equality, even though I didn't know like
Mhm.
that was like a factor, but I would think it would be equality, because some of the like social issues that I do care about is like, things like gender equality, like race equality, so I figured that would be a bigger thing, but it ended up being proportionality. So I was like kind of surprised by that.
hmm So was the equality up there with proportionality, like in
It
your
was actually third. It like I think it goes proportionality, care, and then equality.
hmm
And I think that's like a problem with like the height thing because I think
hmm
just in general having like surveys like multiple choice questions like determine like your morals like even though it is like rated from like oh like most likely to least likely kind of thing, so there is some range. I think it does remove like a lot of the nuance because like a lot of the questions could be like taken differently. I can't think
hmm
of one off the top of my head, but like just for example like I know like purity was like kind of framed as like kind of sexual, which
hmm
like I like I grew up in a very like progressive like house, like that wasn't a thing that was like shied away from in a sense.
hmm
But in terms of like when it and I can't remember if it was height or the other survey that we did, but the way it like framed it as like degrading, like
hmm
putting things in your body, like chemicals in your body, it's like okay, well I don't agree like putting like drugs and like like
Yeah.
recreational drugs in your body, but do I think like chemotherapy works over like natural medicine? Like yeah, for sure.
hmm
So I think that's kind of why purity was kind of rated low. And
hmm
I think just in terms of like proportionality, it does kind of make sense because on other social issues, like, like criminal justice social issues, I do think like proportionality, like, the crime you commit, like, if it's like a minor crime, you shouldn't get like life in jail, like type of
Yeah.
thing. So
Mhm.
I think equality is just more like, should everyone get equal access to everything? And I think like, sure, like obviously, but
Mhm.
I think
Yeah.
proportionality in terms of like, especially like economy. I think that's what a lot of it was framed as in the question. But I think proportionality, like, I would like to believe if you work hard, you get like more rewards in a
Mhm.
sense. Like, if I like work hard, am I going to be like a trillionaire? Like, probably not. But like, I think that's kind of like the distinction that was made like in the survey.
Okay, so you kind of think that the survey questions were kind of like the results that you got were kind of different because of how the survey questions were like phrased. And so I'm just wondering like do you also think that like now that like you have like the six foundations that we have and you have like the definitions that we were given, do you think that some of your thinking processes, like in how you make the actions, are like accurately represented by these like foundations? Like, do you still think that proportionality is up high with the rest, or do you really think that like if you could rephrase the questions, equality would be up higher, and you just kind of think that the quiz was kind of like skewed because of the way they were asked?
Yeah, I think proportionality, and I don't remember like the exact questions from the quiz, but
hmm
proportionality for me, I kind of took it like in like an economic or like a
hmm
work kind of perspective, which so like for example, like in my like work, I talked about in my reflection like doing doing more shifts than everyone else, but we all get paid like the same stipend. Like I don't
hmm
think that's like right, and that's like an issue for me personally, but I think the bigger issues I think is more on care for sure and
hmm
equality. Like for example, like healthcare.
hmm
Um, I don't think, proportionality would say like, if you pay more and like let's say like insurance or like you pay more, you should get better healthcare. Or like
hmm
if you pay higher taxes, you should be able to get to a better school. And I like don't agree with that at all. So I would say in some cases it works and then some cases it doesn't.
Okay. And kind of going off of like the healthcare uh topic, do you really want to like kind of in like a few sentences explain why that's like important to you and then like what your like central beliefs are about that?
Yeah, so I think healthcare, I think especially as like a person like, eventually going to grow up to like, I'm not going to be on like my parents' healthcare anymore. Like,
hmm
I think the idea of like hospitals like charging like $1,000 for like an IV drip because of
Mhm.
like insurance companies. I think that's wrong. And I think just in general, I think the healthcare system as it is now is really like predatory. And I
Mhm.
think like, I shouldn't have to ask for like an itemized bill to like reveal that you're like overcharging me and like,
Mhm.
for everything that you've given me. So type of thing. But I think in an ideal world, I think healthcare should more be available to everyone.
Mhm.
Like it doesn't, you're not going to go in debt for the rest of your life if you like get cancer or something. But I think there should be more care in terms of people who need it more, so not necessarily everyone gets, the same exact healthcare, but like the people who need more intensive healthcare can get it and they're not going to like, you know, go millions of dollars in
Yeah.
debt over it.
Okay, and like something I found like interesting, at least to me, is that it kind of seems like with like the healthcare issue that you've talked about, you kind of like place like purity higher than you would proportionality. Because like as we know, like purity is just like concerns regarding like maintaining and like purity and like stopping degradation, which is kind of like what a
Hmm.
hospital is. It stops like people from getting worse. It sees like the intrinsic value in everyone. Whereas like proportionality, it's like the only one of like the six that Haidt talks about that kind of has like this punishment like
Hmm.
op like aspect towards it. And like hospitals, like what you're saying, like what I know about like hospitals, like they don't really focus on like punishing the patients. They want to help them, even if
Right.
because like you're trying to people make bad decisions a lot and that like hurts them or like something and then they have to go to the hospital, but they're not focusing on punishing them. They're actually trying to do the
Right.
opposite. So I'm just kind of wondering, like, do you think that and like this is like the only case that you can think of, or like are there other cases where you think that like what you like the height test that we took, like the percentages, that we like place value on, do you think that's not like really reflective in like real life situations?
Um, well, with like hospitals, and again, I think that's another issue with the survey is because like it kind of framed it as like, oh, it's low purity if you're like against putting chemicals in your body, which like
Hmm.
a hospital is like essentially putting chemicals in your body, even though it's in like the way to like stop, your body from like becoming
Hmm.
sicker. So I think that's like that just shows like another like falling of like the survey. But I think in other issues, um, I would say maybe any like military issues, I would
Hmm.
say. Um I think again like just like like I view like proportionality in terms of like economics and like jobs.
Hmm.
I think if you know you should be able to like work your way up like in a job just like you can in the military, but I don't necessarily think that like in the military like is like an all-encompassing like good thing,
Hmm.
especially like authority and loyalty or like my lowest, not because like, I don't respect authority or like I don't, think you should be like loyal to like,
Hmm.
your friends or your family or something. But I think more so in terms of military, like if someone's high on authority, they would say, you do whatever like, the country like says you do. And I don't necessarily think that's ethical every single time. And so that would say like I'm low on like authority and loyalty kind of thing, according to like the survey, when in reality, like I guess because authority is more of like a governmental like type thing, like your
Hmm.
authority to the like institutions, or your respect to the institutions, I think there's a lot of cases like in my like personal life where it's like not necessarily loyal to like institutions, but like I respect like what my grandparents say, like I respect like
Hmm.
what my dad and my mom say, but I think that's not really like reflected in the survey.
Okay. And like one last like thing I really wanted to know, because like throughout your whole like time we've been talking, you kind of talk about how like they like kind of work together. Like I've seen how you notice like talk about care and equality and then
Hmm.
also like purity. And I was just wondering because of like how like height really like demarcates and like separates the six foundations. They're really like in clear like organization. Do you
Hmm.
think it's easier for you to explain like how you would like act ethically with just using one of them, or do you think it's easier if you like use multitude of them and kind of show how like it's not just like one moral foundation that makes like that guides your decision, it's like multiple of them kind of like in a
Right.
spectrum?
Yeah, I think for sure I think any like social issue that
Hmm.
like I'm passionate about or like any like social issue that just comes up, I think it's not just one at play. Like for example, like I mean, you could say like even like race equality. You think that'd just be
Hmm.
like purely like equality, but there are elements of like care, like mixed in there. So I don't think any social issue can really just be like defined as one because even if like, two people agree, like, oh,
Hmm.
there should be racial equality, like they might come at it from like different motives or like foundations that they have.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. I feel like what you've been saying really helps like get to that point that like it's not like a single thing that really guides it.
Mhm. Right.
All right, I think we're good.